in history, there was a time when they said we fear the military-industrial complex. Now do we have the business complex and its influence on D.C.? You stepped out of government, and we have to be clear about this, and you ran Halliburton, a very successful company, but companies have influence in Washington, D.C. How do we fix that?
Well, in a sense, I mean, when I look at it, now, admittedly, I've got the viewpoint of somebody who spent most of his adult life here, operating in this environment. But I always, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, to express your point of view, to have government pay attention to whatever it is you want. We don't want to deny that to anybody. Everybody ought to have that right. That's part of our form of government. It's safeguarded in our Constitution. And you can't say, well, I agree with you, so you get to express your point of view. I don't agree with you, so we're going to shut you out.
Right, and I fit that into the fact that there is a role for lobbyists, and there should be, because their role is to advocate for that interest, but it has gone beyond that interest. And I agree with you. I believe that we should have it. So is there too much now, and do we need to find a way through this?
Well, let me walk at it another way, if I can. From Halliburton.
Right.
Halliburton's a big company. When I was running it, we did business in 130 countries around the world, had over 100,000 employees. The company started with one guy who went out and borrowed enough money to be able to buy 4 trucks. This is in a period right after World War I, back in about 1919, 1920. That's it. That was the whole, talk about a small business. That was a small business. And over the years then, over the next 75, 80 years, he built it into the world's, he wasn't there all that time, he died partway through, but it became the first or second largest energy services company in the world.
That's an American
that's
story.
Good old American entrepreneurship. But at what point do you say, well, Halliburton, you're too big now, you don't get to wield your influence in Washington?
See, I don't believe in that.
You can't do that.
I believe you're allowed to become as big as you can, as successful as you can, operating within the boundaries of good behavior.
Yeah. And so it's we've got to be careful always. I'm always a little bit leery of the conspiracy theories. My problem is I look at a lot of corporate America. I think some people today, the crew, for example, that's out to Occupy Wall Street, they see that these are all bad guys. They disagree with them, and they don't like what they do and the way they operate. They think they've got an agenda they fundamentally disagree with. What I see lots of times when I look at that, given my background and my experience and so forth, is a group of people that I fundamentally disagree with on a lot of things, for example, in terms of where they wield their political influence. I mean, Barack Obama gets a heck of a lot more as a Democrat, heck of a lot more money from the Wall Street crowd than we Republicans do.
The Democrats have raised $36.4 million in the last cycle so far from Wall Street, and then they decry it. Barney Frank, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, that's Wall Street money. And back to entrepreneurship. Venture capital, that comes from Wall Street. Money's raised to grow companies like Halliburton. Steve Jobs raised his money on Wall Street.
Starts in business in his garage.
$1,300 with
College
Wozniak.
dropout.
Yeah. So these are all great American stories. Are we, and in your experience, what I see missing is the procedures and due process involved in really regulating properly versus over-regulating, which I think we see coming out of the Obama administration, piling on Dodd-Frank, FinReg, constant EPA regulations. How do we get to a happy medium, a business medium that works for America?
Well, the way I look at it is I start from the proposition that one of the really unique and distinguishing features of our civilization is our private sector, free enterprise economy. That the prosperity we've enjoyed over the years, the phenomenal things we've been able to accomplish, everything from winning World War II to putting a man on the moon, to having the highest per capita income and the greatest health system and so forth comes out of an awful lot of that generated out of the private sector. And it's the entrepreneurship that goes with that, and that we need to have governmental policies, not that overwhelm or overregulate that private sector, but rather that encourages its growth and development, that small businesses go out there and my predecessor, if he can borrow a couple $100 and go rent a taxi cab and go into business for himself, great. We ought to make it easy for him to do that, not by giving him money, but by making certain that the tax system doesn't put him out of business before he even gets started, by being certain that he has some degree of reasonable expectation about what he's going to be able to keep from what he earns going forward. He's not going to change the tax code tomorrow and jack taxes way up so government can spend more of his money. That we need to be very careful about regulation, because lots of times it doesn't work. I had the experience early in my career, David, again I talk about it in the book. We had a thing called wage price controls in the Nixon administration. The Democratic Congress passed legislation giving the president the authority to control the wages, prices, and profits of every man, woman, and child in America.
It's anti-American, frankly.
Yeah,
It's not our business model as a nation.
Well, never thinking he'd never do it. Well, he did. You know, he surprised them all in the summer of 1971 and did it. And they tried to reimpose controls similar to what we had during wartime, during World War II. And I was in charge of 3,000 IRS agents out there trying to enforce wage price controls. You couldn't raise the price of a loaf of bread, you know, unless it fell within certain parameters. The price of milk and hamburger and everything else suddenly became the responsibility of bureaucracy in the federal government. It was a terrible idea. We eventually got out of it, but what you ended up with was a bureaucracy in Washington trying to substitute its judgment at the direction of the Congress and the president for what millions of Americans do out there every day all by themselves as free citizens. They pay what they want to pay for whatever it is they want. That's their choice. So it's not for government to get into that business. And so what I worry about very much is that we need to sort of reaffirm our basic fundamental commitment to that set of values and principles that recognizes that it's private citizens going about their lives on a regular basis, making those kinds of decisions in terms of whatever it is they want to do, that we need to support and sustain, and we need to keep government out of their hair.